Do you in most days feel like you've barely even scratched the surface on your to-do list? On today's episode, I'm going to share with you a simple skill that you can develop that is going to help you take back control of your time. That's coming up next right here on the Unshakable Habits podcast. The right habits can help you have it all: more time, better health, improved relationships, and less stress. But most people lack the tools to stick with those habits long enough to see results. That is about to change. Welcome to Unshakable Habits with your host, Stephen Box. It's time to take your habits from unsustainable to unshakable. Welcome back. I am your host, Stephen Box, and this is episode number 68 of the Unshakable Habits podcast. Today, we are talking about the skill that you need to develop if you are finding yourself barely scratching your to-do list most days. And just a quick story I wanted to share with you guys about something where I can relate to this, right? A few years ago, I launched the podcast, and it was a time in my life that was probably not honestly the best idea. And my intention really wasn't even to honestly launch the podcast. I went in with this intention of setting up my accounts, just getting things ready so that when I was ready to do it, it would be there. And within, I want to say maybe a couple of days, memory's a little fuzzy on it, but I want to say it was within a few days, I was already getting inundated with people going, I love the name Unshakable Habits, want to be on your show. And keep in mind, I had never published a single episode. No one had heard anything out of me. This was totally new, just based on the name. People were like, I love it. I want to be on it. I want to be a guest. I want to come talk about habits. And so all of a sudden I had all these people, and I want to say maybe it was around about 30 people when all was said and done who wanted to be on the podcast. And I'm replying to emails and scheduling because I didn't want to let these people go, right? We're always told, especially in business and in sales, give people while they're hot. And these were hot people, right? They wanted to be on the show now. And I felt this obligation to get them on the show. And I had a lot going on personally at that time. And it probably wasn't really the best time for me to launch. There's a reason why. My initial intention was just to get my stuff set up. I knew I didn't really have the bandwidth for it, but I felt obligated to take it on. And I think this is something that a lot of you might be able to relate to, is you have a lot of things on your plate, and it feels honestly like they all need to be there. They all feel super important, which brings me to what we're talking about today. And that is this skill that I personally had to develop. And I'm going to share with you today so that you can also utilize this skill to take back control of your time. Before we can really dive into the skill, we need to dive into this topic a little bit deeper. So if you are someone out there who is finding yourself really, I'm going to say at least 2 to 3 times a week, maybe more, barely touching that to-do list, barely scratching the surface on it, then you probably have some other things that are going on as well. For example, you might be bringing work home with you on a pretty regular basis, or maybe you're constantly having to check your emails or your text messaging from work at night or even on the weekends when you're supposed to be spending time with family, which then, of course, leads to a lot of conflict at home, right? You end up arguing with your spouse because you're constantly distracted. You feel disconnected from the family. Maybe you're missing out on events that are important to you. It's one of those things where you feel like, man, I really want to be able to have this balance. I want to be able to spend time with my family. I want to feel connected with my spouse, but I also recognize that work is really important and I need to be able to take care of these things. And so again, going back to what I was saying before in my example, where you just feel like everything is so important and it has to be there. And you might be feeling like, man, how do I balance all of this out? How do I make this happen? And I find for a lot of people, especially those who are successful with work, a lot of times the struggle is, why is it that I can be successful over here, but I can't be successful everywhere else? Now, the real issue here is, and this might feel obvious, but maybe you haven't stopped to think about it, is that you simply have too much on your plate. You may have heard that before. People say, oh, you just need to, cut back or better manage your time or things like that. But the reality is, again, all of those things feel super important. How do we take some of those things off of our plate really starts to become the question, right? I'm willing to bet that you have tried time management tools. You've tried being more productive, right? You've tried to do time blocking or different techniques to get more work done. You've maybe trying to set some boundaries at work, but the time management thing really ends up not working out for you. Now, here's the thing. I want to be very clear about this. It makes sense when we think about time management that the problem is I have a lack of time. I need to better learn to manage my time. The problem with time management is it focuses on this idea of arranging things. And when you're already overcommitted, rearranging your time using time management tools is like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? It doesn't matter how efficiently you organize the chairs, the ship is sinking and the chairs aren't going to stop it from happening, right? That's a lot of times what happens when we're trying to use time management tools and we're just basically taking the pieces that are already there and moving them around and we're trying to figure out, why is the ship still sinking? The question is, what does work? What can you do that's actually going to help you to get those results that you want? And the good news is it's actually really simple. And it's learning to say no. Now, maybe when I said that, your very first thought was, I can't say no. Too hard, not going to do it, don't like to be the person who says no. And look, I get it. When I feel like I'm adding value to other people, that fires me up, right? So I get why it can be very difficult to say no, but I had to learn to do it because the reality is not everything on your plate is as important as it seems to be right now. I had to get my values, my priorities in line. I had to figure out what was important. It gives you control of your schedule and it allows you to decide what is truly important and what is not so important. Now, if you're sitting there right now listening to my voice and you're saying, okay, Stephen, I'm not 100% sure I can do this, but I see the value in it and I recognize that if I learn to say no, they can help me. But I am a little bit worried about doing this. I am worried about ruffling feathers, upsetting people, disappointing people, all those things. If that's the case, I'm going to invite you back to our next episode because I'm going to give you a framework for how to say no without disappointing people, without sounding like a jerk, without coming across as being this selfish, self-absorbed person. I'm going to show you how to say no without any of those negative things happening. And that's going to be on our next episode. And if you enjoyed today's episode, if you got that value out of it, and you want to be that person who helps other people out, I would very much appreciate if you guys could leave us a review on either Apple or Spotify, whichever one you're listening to right now. That would really help us out in terms of the growth of the show. And with that, I want to remind you, as always, that while none of us are born unshakable, we can all become unshakable.